The protagonist's story began on a fateful day, after he learned that his childhood best friend had secured a boyfriend, leaving him to rot in the depths of the friend zone. Even though Osaka swore to get a girlfriend, he knew that there was no way a hideous-faced, beta-ranked loser like himself would ever get one, so he sought the help of a powerful Tinder goddess. This so-called goddess appeared to have an allergy to clothes, and so Osaka wondered whether he was in the wrong place. But after she confirmed her identity, he wished for a girlfriend. After a few kumbayas, the goddess pronounced that he would never have one. Desperate and frustrated by virginhood, Osaka requested that she do something about it since she was a goddess, so she grabbed his smartphone, and a list of 6 girls appeared on the screen, one of whom the goddess had destined to become his girlfriend. Osaka was filled with questions, but the goddess explained that she reversed his fate and pulled the chain of connected events that would lead to him definitely getting a girlfriend. In fact, if he were lucky, he should look forward to getting results only a day after. Back in school, Osaka breezed through the list of girls who were potential girlfriend candidates. One of them was his classmate, a blonde girl named Mia, and there was the girl from the next class named Sayaka and the top scorer in the national mock exam named Maito. Those were the only girls he knew, while the other 2 were not in their school. The last one turned out to be his childhood best friend, Tauka, but he believed there was no way she could be his destined partner because they had been friends since kindergarten and were now practically siblings. At that time, Tauka went on bragging about a gift her boyfriend had given her and forced him to take a selfie with her, so he grabbed her phone to delete it, but this wound up in a petty fight, and they almost kissed. Regardless of what seemed like a girlfriend power trip, Tauka had 0 chances of being his destined partner, so Osaka only delighted himself in the possibility of having another girl on his list as his girlfriend. Later that evening, he got pissed because nothing had happened despite the goddess's promise, not even a word from any other girl on his list or some accidental flashing gone wrong. The only event worthy of noting was having his best friend's melons crush him, but he already knew that she could never be his girlfriend. While he nagged about the goddess, precisely at 6 o'clock, his neck snapped, leading to his instant death. Right away, he found himself at the shrine, and the cursed goddess burst out laughing before sharing that his destined girlfriend couldn't end up with him because she would end up taking her life the following evening. For that reason, Osaka really would have been destined never to end up with a girlfriend, but the goddess changed things so that a version of him being without a girlfriend would never exist. In other words, the moment his destined girlfriend died, he would also die and then restart the loop, a cycle that would repeat itself until he reached the point in his life where he had a girlfriend. Osaka didn't ask her for all of this, but she was excited. That was because it kept her entertained. The next day, Osaka tried to convince himself that everything was just a dream, but he was stunned when the entire day's events were exactly as the previous day. He had to organize his thoughts and calmly come up with a plan. Knowing he had a fated girlfriend who would end up taking her life, if he failed to save this girl, he would have to die and start over again. But luckily, the fated girlfriend was one of the 6 people registered on the Shrine Goddess app, so he only had to find the girl who was likely to take her life out of those 6 and stop that from happening. Unfortunately, the only girl he had the audacity to talk to was Tauka, but there was no way that Crackhead would want to take her life, so that left him with the other 5. Aside from the girl in his class, the other 4 girls were difficult to locate, so the possibility of meeting them all in one day just seemed unlikely. While he was busy thinking of a plan, school was over, and he knew he was running out of time, so he planned to approach the girl in his class who was named Mia. The idiot confidently walked up to her and asked her out, but she said she would rather chug toilet water than date him. Just then, he tripped on the staircase and twisted his knee, and then it was 6 o'clock yet again. His neck snapped once more, and he found himself in the shrine yet again. The goddess was having her fun watching him suffer, but he warned her not to mess with him. However, she reintroduced herself as Yusuga, the goddess of matchmaking and the one who governed fate. As such, Osaka's misery had only just begun. Now that he knew the process of his dying would repeat as many times as necessary until he succeeded in meeting his girlfriend, he just couldn't let the same day go over and over again in a loop, so it would be better to plan strategically. If he were to prevent his own death, he would have to prevent the death of his destined girlfriend, one of the girls on that list. Mia was his first shot, but he stood no chance of bagging her. Luckily, after his death, she wouldn't recall how she dumped him in the mud. Coincidentally, his classmates were gossiping about her because pictures of her were flying all over the internet. He asked, and Tauka informed him that thirst traps from Mia's OnlyFans account had been leaked. Tauka herself wanted to stop everything from happening, but wasn't sure whether reporting to a teacher was the right move. Osaka realized that Mia had a credible reason to want to end her life, given the emotional bullying. Even though he couldn't see her becoming his own girlfriend, There wasn't much time, so he had to at least try and talk to her. Before the school bell rang, she was already on her way home, so he went after her. It was almost 6, and he still couldn't find her, so he worried that she might have already begun the process of ending it all, leading to his own inevitable death. Instead of searching, he decided to look for a location where she would most likely end her life, and he discovered her standing near the train. Right away, he pushed her away from the sides, trying desperately to advise her against a bad decision, but she kicked him and told him to get the heck out. He begged her to listen to what he had to say, and surprisingly, he found that it was already past 6 o'clock. With that, she was embarrassed and dragged him to a corner, asking why he was messing with her. Now that he wasn't dead, it meant that he may have saved his destined girlfriend, and that meant Mia. The moment he uttered that atrocity, she was freaked out, so he also freaked out, stating that he had come to talk to her about her leaked selfies and was worried that she might be feeling down. Mia was confused because it wasn't his business and they had never even spoken before, but to Osaka, he was only trying to help since they were classmates. She gave him a chance, asking him to confirm if he really was willing to do anything to help her, and the idiot delightfully said yes, so she instructed him to get some clothes and change. He followed her to an undisclosed location, which later turned out to be a hotel, so Bro was already celebrating the gruesome murder of his virginity until he realized that she was only about to use him as a free photographer. He wondered why she was so comfortable letting him take those pictures, but she said she had nothing to lose since he had already seen it, and it'd be similar to the ones she had posted before. It was weird how she didn't fear that he'd attack her, but she said she was not worried about things like that because she knew Osaka was destined to die without getting some. Got angry and wished she wouldn't trample on his masculinity like that, but she said she knew that even if he was going to harm her, he didn't even know where to put what. In fact, she welcomed him to try it, but he could only keep staring at those balloons underneath the beautiful lace. After almost losing his breath, he yielded and confessed that he was a noob who knew nothing at all. She said there was no point in apologizing, and even if he saw her bare body, he wouldn't feel anything. Sokka couldn't place his finger on what was wrong with this girl, but since he had probably just saved her from taking her life, then it meant she probably lacked confidence in her appearance. He called her cute, but she got angry and said she was not cute. Next thing he knew, the girl had flown out of the room and he had to start searching for her. In the process, he bumped into Tauka, who was quite dazed and acting out of character. She was shocked that he made Mia wear a nurse outfit for roleplay and made her run out in that state, but he confessed that he only said Mia was cute. From Tauka's expression, it was obvious she felt jealous, but she gave him Mia's address and told him to take responsibility for her until the very end. At the same time, Mia created a post informing everyone that she was deleting her account. Later, Osaka visited Mia's residence but met her older sister, whose deadly face card almost gave him a heart attack. He asked her if Mia was around, but was informed that she was not, so she began to worry that she had gone to end her life elsewhere. But he also couldn't get over the fact that he had seen Mia's older sister before. Meanwhile, Mia was indeed standing on the rooftop and was about to jump but was shocked to see Osaka behind her, after the poor guy had actually gone through hell and back to locate her. She asked him why he was there, and he brought out a magazine with her sister's face on it, and asked if the whole selfie thing had anything to do with her older sister. She wasn't initially forthcoming about the matter. Still, with much of his pestering, she narrated that she used to be very close to her older sister and admired her deeply until the guy Mia liked confessed his feelings to her own sister, which made her feel like a lesser version of her sister. In fact, her sister had over 200,000 followers, so Mia created an account where she posted some naughty photos just to get the same number of followers. This still did not help her to beat her sister, so she resorted to taking her own life because it was so pointless. After listening, all Osaka had to say was that the whole thing was dumb. This annoyed Mia, and she told him not to mess with her, but he told her it should be the other way around because his own life was on the line for a stupid reason. Instead of wasting his time, he grabbed her phone and took a selfie of his depressing face, posting it with the quote that Mia had a boyfriend and was quitting. She was upset and tried to grab her phone, while Osaka went around looking at the comments, especially one that said he looked like a guy warming up a bench for the ping-pong team. In the end, Mia gave up and called him an idiot, and Osaka told her she was beautiful just the way she was. Even though she always had a frown on her face whenever she did smile, she looked cute. She was silent for a while but smacked him on his cheek and posted that on her page as well, attracting death threats from other men who wished they were in Osaka's position. With that, she was delighted, and Osaka believed he must have stopped her from ending her life, so the only thing left was to ask her out. But Mia turned him down, and all he wanted was to bury his head and be forgotten, because it was this same girl who kissed him on the cheek and did all this cute stuff with him, so he didn't even understand the whole love thing. In any case, he decided it was time to move on, and that if he got rejected, he would just have to keep trying. The next morning, he met Mia on his way to school and noticed her hair was cut short after they had a nice conversation together. Walking around with him surely attracted gossip, so Osaka told her it would probably be better for her not to walk to school with someone like him. However, she said she was no longer interested in stuff like that anymore, and then explained that he may have misunderstood her response to his request that she become his girlfriend. She did say no, not because dating him was absolutely impossible, but because being asked something like that caught her off guard. In fact, it wasn't that she disliked him, and at that moment, she already had feelings for him. But just before she could confess her feelings, Osaka was hit by a truck and exploded right before her. He woke up on his bed and was screaming for dear life as he realized that he had died yet again. This only meant that Mia was not his destined girlfriend. However, it was all the more confusing, and Osaka was back to square one, wondering whether his actions by talking to Mia had completely affected someone else and changed the outcome of events. However, he noticed that it wasn't as if he had gone back a whole day, but if he did nothing different, he would probably die in 30 minutes. So, just to change the turn of events, he decided to talk to Tauka. Even ran past Mia on the way, and this idiot stood on a bridge screaming that anyone on Earth should volunteer to be his girlfriend. At this point, he was crying and desperate because with very little time, that was all he could do. Just then, a girl wearing glasses appeared right in front of him and responded to his desperate cry for a girlfriend, and then asked if he would like to be her boyfriend in turn, to which he said yes. The next day, Osaka went to see the goddess, hoping to emerge with a genius rule-breaking plan for an instant solution. But she said she wasn't happy that, after all the trouble she went through setting up difficulty for him, he had refused to die. She even said he apologized to her, but she told him his apology felt insincere, and he should probably end his life to give her some real entertainment. Osaka was filled with rage and asked her why she was doing that to him, but she reminded him that it was he who made the wish, and besides that, she was tired of brain rot. In summary, Osaka had to keep entertaining her, so there was no way she would help him find his destined person. He later looked into everyone over the past 3 days. To begin with, Maito was never in the classroom, and Hinako and Yuji were both third years, so it would be impossible for him to create a connection with them. He set Tauka aside for the time being, so the only person left to consider was Mia as his destined partner. She was planning to let him know that she wasn't completely against dating him. At that precise moment, the girl in glasses walked up to him to remind him about their date. When Mia saw this, she was shocked beyond words, and even Osaka was surprised at his classmates' reaction, because it seemed everyone was shocked to see a girl talk to him. Even Tauka teased him, saying he was now dating her, and she was quite surprised because Sayaka was beauty and brains, although she was mostly an airhead and made guys like her for how dumb she was. Even though Osaka said they weren't dating, Tauka felt he was just covering it up. When he teased her about her boyfriend, she turned and walked away. Later, Osaka conversed with Sayaka, who asked him to be her practice partner for a few days. She said she had never had that sort of experience before, and the only thing he could think about was the experience that could grease his wand. However, she was only speaking about her dating experience, which would help her become a novelist in the future. Apparently, she had one of her manuscripts reviewed by a relative who worked in publishing, but he told her that her romantic scenes lacked depth, and that was probably because she didn't have enough romantic experience. She really hadn't dated anyone before, so the moment she heard him screaming that he wanted a girlfriend, she thought it was the perfect opportunity to ask him. Osaka was all in because he could get some, but he also realized she was one of his potential girlfriends, meaning he had to figure out if she was planning to take her own life. With that, he said he would plan the date, so he walked over to Mia, asking her for date venue ideas. Surprisingly, Mia got upset and slammed the desk, asking him what the heck he meant and why he was even asking her, considering the fact that he had confessed to her and it meant he liked her. However, he told Mia that she turned him down and he no longer mattered, but it felt like he drove a sword right through her chest, so she wished him death. She also said she wished to end the version of her who worried about a skunk like him. In any case, she told him to ask Tauka since they were best friends, but he said Tauka would brag about her boyfriend for half the time. After he explained that Sayaka's struggles didn't seem to be only about her novels, Mia realized that he was only trying to help Sayaka as he helped her, so she listed a bunch of places where he could go on a date. Much later, Osaka came prepared for his date with Sayaka, and she showed up looking nice and casual. The feeling was beyond amazing for him, but he remembered it wasn't the time for him to enjoy himself, as he also had to check if Sayaka was troubled enough to end her life. He then asked her if she was really worried about her novel and to what extent she was. She admitted being worried, but he came out right and asked her if her novel was the kind of thing that made her want to die. However, Sayaka shared that she'd never thought of dying. Her face was so expressionless, so Osaka wasn't sure whether to believe what she was saying or what exactly it was that was on her mind, so he decided to observe her reactions throughout the rest of the date. He kept asking her questions about their date, and she seemed to say things were either delicious or nice or cute, but all with a very straight expression on her face. Heck, her facial muscles weren't even moving an inch, and it suddenly felt like she was a cyborg controlling the earth from the shadow realm. When it was nightfall, they decided to head back, but Sayaka apologized for having seemingly bored Osaka out of his brains, and then she shared that she wasn't quite sure whether the date helped her at all, but she was grateful for the effort he put into making it work. When he retired to bed, he realized that it didn't seem at all that she was going to take her life because she smiled normally at the end. However, he checked the time and decided he would check someone else, although he wasn't sure how anything would happen. On the other hand, Sayaka was indeed distressed and trying to end her life, so the moment she got into her house, she picked up a belt and hung herself, and the same thing happened to Osaka, so he died yet again. When he caught up, Osaka was in extreme pain, a pain he could never get used to no matter how many times he had gone through it. Since this happened, he realized that probably Sayaka had taken her own life, or just someone else. He checked the date, and it was the day before his date with Sayaka, so he still had some time. The next issue was what exactly to do, because the girl didn't seem like someone who would want to end her life, so he considered canceling his date with her and focusing on finding the other three. However, on the internet, what was trending was the sudden deaths of celebrities who usually were trying to take their lives. He remembered that when he was on his date with Sayaka, and he asked whether she had been troubled enough to be at the point of seeking death, she had initially paused briefly before responding to him. After spending a whole day with her, he noticed that it was weird for her to take a pause before answering any questions, because she usually gave him immediate responses to his questions. Right then, he called Tauka, who was tormenting her poor bathtub, and shared the issue of nervousness pertaining to his date with Sayaka. However, she calmed him and encouraged him to try understanding Sayaka and start by sharing more about himself, so she would eventually feel free to open up to him. It made a lot of sense to Osaka, so much later, he took Sayaka to see the movies and shared that it felt strange that she talked a lot at times. He asked her if she had some place that might be difficult for her to go on her own, so in the process he would get to know her better. So Sayaka took him to an antique bookstore and asked him to give her a shoulder ride so she could pick one right up. However, he told her she could simply ask the clerk to bring out a stepladder, but Sayaka said she was terrified to talk to the clerk. He thought she was just being cute and shy, so he offered to ask the clerk for her, but found that bro looked more like a member of the Yakuza than a store clerk. Instantly, he agreed to give her the shoulder ride instead, but surprisingly, Sayaka found a way to put him on her own shoulders because she was wearing a skirt. From where he was, Osaka could smell every single good thing about her, and could tell that his legs were resting on the cushions of nature. But the store clerk somehow appeared while they were grabbing each other's goodies and all that. It was then that the store clerk showed up with the step ladder, and when they left the bookstore, they felt pretty awkward around each other. Sayaka asked him to forget everything that happened in the store, and he swore not to have night fantasies about it. To change the subject, he asked her what book she bought, and she said it was a novel that she loved when she was younger. The story was about a talentless kid who kept adventuring by using creativity and determination. Back then, Sayaka could relate to the protagonist, and even though the book wasn't that great, it had inspired her to start writing novels. Picking up on the cue, Osaka asked her to let him read the one she was currently working on because if she only needed romance to help out with her novel, he could also help her. She asked him to read it but not give her any feedback at all, as she had some plans later that night and wanted to head home early. This alarmed Osaka because before he died the first time during the date, she went home but he wasn't sure whether she went out afterward. Apparently, Sayaka was going to have her uncle review her novel. Given the time he died last time, Osaka thought she was at home, but on second thought, something may have happened with her uncle afterwards, and if Sayaka wasn't the one who ended up dying, it meant he would have. In any case, he decided to dig into the novel, but by the time he was done reading the novel, he was wrecked mentally and emotionally because the setting was overstuffed, and everything was a mess. In fact, he felt she would thrive better at being a professional rock thrower than a writer, so he tracked her to her uncle's place and wondered what sort of review the man would give Sayaka. Osaka eavesdropped on the conversation as Sayaka shared with her uncle that she went on a date with someone and gained more insight into writing a more romantic story. Her uncle promised that if she could figure herself out in writing, he might introduce her to an editor he knew because he had quite a few connections in the industry. He then stood up, telling her that dating a boy her age might not give her much insight, and they may be inexperienced, but she could try a different approach. As he said that, he placed his hands on her body, saying he needed her to really understand what romance was all about, and that she should try dating him instead. Sayaka didn't understand what he meant, or was rather hoping he didn't mean the obvious, but her stupid uncle came out clean then, advertising his crooked pickle. Meanwhile, Osaka couldn't hear a thing from where he was, so he decided to go inside. Luckily, the door wasn't locked at all, so he just snuck in. Meanwhile, Sayaka was uneasy because of all the men in the world. Her first just had to be an old geezer gnawing at his chlamydia-cursed family jewels. He pushed him away, but he confronted her for being stupidly confident to believe she could casually write and somehow become a novelist. He also said she was about to throw away the valuable industry connection he was offering her, but she said she only wanted to get better at writing and didn't intend for things to turn out so weird. In any case, he told her the industry wasn't as easy as she thought it was because everything boiled down to connections, no matter how good her novel was. She could reject him, but if she ever wanted to make it as a novelist, there was only one path to take in the end. He turned and said she didn't have to come anymore since she wasn't serious about her career and writing novels was just a game. Sayaka could no longer refuse his advances, so he held her and apologized for what he said while unbuckling her belt and saying she wouldn't regret it. Luckily, Osaka intervened in time, smashed his head with a stick, and told Sayaka to run. Her uncle told her to explain to Osaka that he wasn't doing anything violent. Also, when she ran out, instead of doing as he instructed, the uncle said he was finally saved from whatever garbage he called writing, because her work was so boring that there was no way she would ever become a professional writer. When she left, he turned to Osaka and told him that he would probably get expelled from school for trespassing and assault. But Osaka told him he had no hoots to give because he had already died 4 times and nothing scared him. He left the disgusting idiot, but was pretty scared because he had crossed the line with this one. However, Sayaka was more important at the moment, and there was only an hour left until the time he died last time, and it also meant that it was in the next hour that Sayaka would attempt to take her life. He found her seated alone, and quietly, and then she reassured him that he blasted the heck out of her uncle so he won't get close to her. Also, if she reported her uncle, he would definitely get arrested. However, Sayaka said none of that was the point, and nothing mattered at that moment but what he thought of her novel. He shared with her that it wasn't super boring, even though deep down, he couldn't praise it because of how weird it was when he read it. She then went on to tell him that back in school, she had a friend read one of her novels, and the friend said that maybe Sayaka wasn't cut out for it because her themes were difficult to grasp and were too plain. The same friend also said that she was untalented and should give up on becoming a professional. That girl had read more books than Sayaka, so she assumed her friend was right, but she couldn't accept that she wasn't cut out for writing novels and continued writing without showing anyone. Soon, she got into an advanced class and met her uncle, who claimed that, for her age, her writing was pretty solid and something was compelling about it. Since her uncle was the first one to have ever praised her writing, no matter what happened, she only wrote less sensible things with more time. And even after he helped her, she still couldn't understand anything and realized she should never have written in the first place. Now she felt so miserable, so Osaka got her a drink but found her lying on the bench and was terrified that she might have already taken her life. It turned out she was only sleeping, but he knew that he couldn't leave her like that, so he called in a favor for some reason. He gave her his phone and someone from a publishing company reached out to her. The publisher offered to review her manuscript, all thanks to Osaka, who'd prodded Mia to reach out to her high-profile sister to connect her to an editor. However, the person confessed that her work wasn't really great because it was all over the place, probably because she had spent so much time overthinking and over-researching it on the internet. This was actually a crushing blow to her ego, but the person advised her to resolve her story in a way that was intriguing to the reader. Even Osaka felt bad about how harsh the critique was, but the person only wanted her to rewrite the last 10 pages of her work and submit it even to the newcomer's award. This was because her work was good in the first few pages, but towards the latter part it became messy, so she only needed to work on that. After a few words from the same person, Sayaka was left feeling inspired, agreed that she would write it and discussed later developments. After the phone call, Sayaka was happier and admitted to Osaka that she was only scared of being told that she was not talented. Thereafter, she discussed more with Osaka, and he told her hard work ethic was pretty cool. Just then, he noticed that it was already past the time he died the previous day, so Sayaka might have been his destined girlfriend. He asked her to go out with him, but she said she couldn't waste aura on a guy even the gods rejected. Her harsh words buried him alive, but she told him that she just wanted to take a break from everything and think everything through, maybe in about a year. Osaka cried his lungs out, but she told him it wasn't that she disliked him and owed him a ton of gratitude. To worsen matters, she hugged him and kissed him on his cheek while telling him that they should just forget everything that had ever happened. Osaka was there again, wondering why ladies would just turn him down but still kiss him, just like Mia and Sayaka had done. On a more serious note, he asked her whether she had ever felt like dying because of her novel. However, she said she had never, but the pause in her answer made him wonder whether she was even the one. In that same space, Tauka was in the background but not visible to any of them. But as they planned to return, Sayaka realized she had left her wallet in her uncle's house, so Osaka returned to fetch the wallet for her but was scared that her uncle would catch him. Just as he picked it, a female voice told him that the man wasn't around. He recognized her as Mido, one of his destined partners, and she shared that Sayaka's uncle was on the run because of a lawsuit over another woman, so she picked up his papers because he had already been paid in advance. Osaka kept talking to her, but she ignored him, so he decided to get her contact info, but as he turned to get his bag, she called him out by his full name. And then the next thing he knew, a 9mm was pointed at his forehead, followed by a bang. The girl was just joking, and what she pointed at him was more or less a stun gun of sorts. Surprisingly, she asked him to be her friend because he had always caught her attention, and she thought him to be pretty cool. Osaka, for the first time in his life, felt like a human and had to bask in his newfound aura even as Mido asked him for his contact info. She installed an app on his device and placed his hands on her jelly bags. Dude wondered what had gotten into her and said he wasn't going to say anything until he had a lawyer. However, she told him that if he ever wanted to touch her, all he needed to do was ask. Seizing the opportunity, he confidently proceeded to ask her out, but she slammed him with a big fat no, saying she had plans and had to head home. But just to give him hope, she said she wanted them to talk more from that day onward. At the end of the day, he lay on his bed and was glad he had survived, meaning his destined girlfriend hadn't taken her life yet. If Sayaka wasn't lying, then it meant that his actions indirectly stopped someone else from taking her life. And he also realized that even though he was going to the same school with all those girls, they had been going through so much that no one would be able to tell just by looking at them. As a result, he was aware that Tauka was also someone who seemed to be free of problems. Meanwhile, Mido was tracking Osaka with a location tracking app as he planned to return Sayaka's wallet and then look into the remaining 3 girls. But just then, Hinako Kusaka ran past him, and he struggled against the urge to stalk her like the creep he was. However, she was running, and normally, dude couldn't keep fit to save his own life, so that was punishment. But he surprisingly found out that she was headed to the shrine. Just then, she fell on her knees, asking the goddess to shorten the time needed for her to have a boyfriend. But before she could finish, Osaka quickly stopped her from making her wish. She wondered why he was trying to stop her, but he told her that she should not make a wish at that shrine because it was cursed and she would most probably die. The girl was shocked, but she thanked him sincerely for letting her know. And she also said that she had made some wishes 3 days back, but none of them had worked. With that, she decided to head home, but before he could catch up to her and stop her to ask for her contact, she was long gone. Later, he ran into Sayaka, who said she had noticed him creeping up on Hina. But he explained that he wasn't stalking, but rather wanted to talk to her for a bit and didn't know how best to approach her. Despite the quintillion paragraphs of excuses he gave her, it still seemed like he was stalking her. Deep down, he was worried that Hina was troubled about something, so he just wanted to talk to her and help. He asked Sayaka if she knew anything about Hina, and she said all she knew was that the girl was famous, was on the track team, and was even selected as an Olympic candidate. Osaka wondered how someone so bright and cheerful would ever be thinking about suicide, but with his experience with these girls, he knew it was possible. But of all the times she could choose, Sayaka decided to bring up the whole dating thing and started saying that after she gave it some thought overnight, she decided they would be better off as friends. Again, dude had all his hopes as high as Mount Everest, but they were dashed so devastatingly. She also said she found something interesting, and it happened to be a picture of him getting kissed by Mia. Using that, and in addition to the fact that she also caught him creeping up on Hina, she judged him to be a hopeless, irredeemable scumbag pig, who wasn't the kind she would like to end up with. However, she acknowledged that he was not a bad person, given that he helped her, and so she concluded that it would be best for them to remain friends. Even though Osaka would rather die by the guillotine than be friend-zoned yet again, it was better than nothing. Not to mention that Sayaka gave him a whole scientific theory about how they could still end up as lovers from being friends, so they could also be friends with a lot of benefits. With that, he held Sayaka's hand and thanked her while rushing to check up on Hina. The next day, he rewarded Mia with a dumb space shark keychain for helping him out. But even after asking her if she knew anything about Hina, she also had nothing to say. Hina seemed to have a great reputation among everyone, and her life seemed to be going perfectly, so it made Osaka wonder why at all she would ever want to make a wish. In any case, he went to class but noticed that Tauka was absent. And then he later tracked Hina down to the track and field, where again she ran and came in first place. Everyone was cheering her on, saying they were rooting for her at the championships. With the intimidating number of people surrounding Hina, it was nearly impossible for Osaka to ever meet her. But just then, his tormentor showed up with her weird weapon and playfully shot him in the foot. She said that was the second time they had met, and that they would complete the conversation another time, but her suspicious mannerisms only filled Osaka with questions. And even worse, just as soon as she left, it was almost as if she had disappeared, like she was some sort of demon. Suddenly he felt strangled and suffocated and could barely catch his breath. However, what he thought was a simple suffocation turned out to be a fatal one that led to his death. He woke up again and realized that his destined girlfriend must have died, and it had to be either Maito or Hina. When he got up, he realized he was on the road to the shrine, which means it was right before he met Hina. And since he was restarting there, it meant she was most likely the destined one. Again, he watched her try to offer and make a wish in front of the gods. So he asked her if she was troubled about anything related to her tracks and whatnot. She asked him instantly how he figured that out, and the idiot said he was a psychic. This airhead fell for his lies in one swoop, and then she said that if he really was a psychic, then he would know about her other problem. He claimed he did, even if he was lying through his teeth. And when he placed his hand on her head, he asked if it had anything to do with her relationships, her grades, or anything related to her health or even romance. With so much definitiveness, he said it was certainly one of those topics. Obviously, the stupid girl believed him, saying she had something to discuss with him, so she gave him her contact info. As she left, the goddess appeared and said he had given her quite the show and was rather intriguing for her to watch. However, he asked her why he always died a different way, and if he was dying the same way his destined girlfriend died. She said that was absolutely correct, and that she had forgot to mention that, because since they had forcibly connected two people who were never meant to cross paths, it only meant that if the person he was destined to date died, then his fate would be the same as that. This was a rather messed up discovery after seeing that there were so many variations of one person trying to end her life. But the goddess seemed too cheerful and even offered to answer another question if he had one for her. And so he asked her why she hadn't granted Hina's wish to her. The goddess said that she wasn't obligated to grant every single wish, and she only believed in wishes that benefited her personally. Later that evening, Osaka bumped into Miya and later Sayaka, with whom he reinforced the friend zone. His priority was to hurry because he had only a few minutes until he would probably die like he did the last day. Since he couldn't get close to Hina, all he had to do was wait after school, but the one obstacle was the pain in his neck, Maito. She came with her weird play gun, but he told her if she was going to trap him, she would need a smarter plan because he wouldn't fall for her tricks again. She asked him how many times they had met, but he wondered why she kept asking him, so he simply told her that it was the third time since they had met. However, she shot him in his neck, and the next thing he knew, he was her hostage, all tied up in her room, staring at those pretty legs that activated his third leg. She had probably used a stun gun to get him, but said she wasn't about to hurt him, although she had some questions. Surprisingly, she said he was probably leaving that day the second time, but he claimed he had no idea what she was talking about, even though he was visibly shocked that she knew that. However, she said the giveaway was that he had earlier said they had met for the third time, which was quite strange because she had only met him the previous night and that day. Osaka claimed it was a slip of the tongue, but she rebutted that her air gun was a custom piece she made herself, which was one of a kind and should be impossible to dodge on the first try. But Osaka had dodged it perfectly, almost as if he had seen it before, so all she wanted to know was how he did that, if he really claimed he hadn't left that day before. 1,000 things ran through his mind, and he wasn't sure whether to reveal the real reason for her or not, but the next thing she said shocked him. Precisely, it was that she mentioned the name of the goddess Yasuga. Osaka was again shocked beyond words and asked how she knew about that name, but she told him not to be so scared and that she only wanted to help him out. Before Osaka would completely fall for what she was saying, he spotted a magazine and realized she must have read the story of Yasuga, who was a goddess that granted wishes. However, Maito revealed that the said magazine was published by her own company and was supposed to be released the following month. Osaka was more devastated than ever before, and she shared that the new magazine was created for gathering information, and if he shared what he knew with her, she could share information with him that wasn't stated in the magazine. Deep down, Osaka wanted to share what he was going through, but he wasn't sure if it was okay to talk about it because Maito was a potential partner. So far, the time had already gone past the time he had died the previous day, so talking to Mito definitely did save his life and the life of his destined girlfriend. In the end, he told her everything, and she said it was just as she feared. In truth, she had a request she wanted to ask of the goddess, but from her research, she found that most people who visited the shrine became deranged. It was for that reason she introduced the legend in her magazine to see if anyone was recklessly trying to make a wish. While monitoring the shrine, she noticed that Osaka was acting strangely after visiting the shrine. That was when Osaka realized that he was the reckless test subject Mito and her magazine folks had used for their research. She told him he had been helpful, though, and she was even willing to help him fulfill his wish. With that, she got her cowgirl hat on and asked him to date her. Without even waiting for his response, she deeply kissed him and they kept going, but she suddenly stopped. Osaka was soaked, but he also had to ask her what the heck she was doing, and she explained that she was only trying to see if they had fulfilled the conditions for his dilemma to come to an end. But now that it didn't work, it meant she was either not the destined girlfriend, or kissing him wasn't the condition to be fulfilled. The next thing this foolish girl thought of was that they should plug each other, right there and then, and she said it so unhinged, with her melons blinding his eyes and distorting his senses. It was pretty hard for Osaka to think of anything, but he didn't want to lose his innocence while in bondage like that. With that, the act began in earnest, but somehow Mito started coughing in the middle of the act. He wondered whether it was that he disgusted her that much until she pointed to a medicine cabinet and told him to bring her meds for her. She administered them to herself, saying she thought she was going to die. And it turns out that she had only about 6 months left to live and had been born with several missing organs. Despite the many transplants, she couldn't even handle the surgery, so she had just been living on borrowed time after spending most of her life in a hospital. Thereafter, her parents abandoned her, even though they were super rich. At least they gave her a hefty sum of money to keep her mouth shut, and so she found her way to research if there was a way to survive outside modern medicine. This landed her at the Yasuga Shrine as her last resort, and her wish was to fix her body. Now it was finally clear to Osaka why Mito was being oddly pushy. It was coming from a place of desperation. She apologized for all the things she made him go through and said they couldn't even proceed with the deed because her body's autonomic system was messed up, and any form of excitement would trigger spasms. In other words, because she had never done it before, it made her pretty nervous. In any case, she said they could push her issues aside and decide what to do next. There were 2 ladies left for Osaka as his possible destined girlfriend, who were Hinako and Yuji. As for Hina, Mito already had an idea what her problem was because she had visited the shrine even before Osaka did, and all Osaka had to do was confirm it. Later, he met up with Hina, who invited him to his place to hear her out concerning her problems. The 2 things Mito wanted him to check when he was with Hina were to underneath her wristband and inside her bag for some stuff. First, he visited her, and she shocked him by suddenly bowing to ask him to become her tutor because she sucked at math and was in academic trouble. He said he was only in his 2nd year, but the airhead said she had been pretty clueless about anything academic since her 2nd year. In any case, he promised to help her out, but after he taught her some first-year material, she easily grasped it and got the answers right. Seeing her speed of assimilation made Osaka think she would certainly have been able to follow along in regular classes because she was a fast learner. But just as he was about to teach her the next lesson, she fell fast asleep. This gave him an insight into why she was probably failing, so he seized the opportunity to try and look underneath her wristband as Mito had asked him to. The dude was initially being lewd, and all of that until he saw that she had needle marks on her wrist. Osaka was absolutely shocked because this was a girl who was on the track team as a legend on the track and who was even an Olympic candidate. Perhaps that could explain why she was under a lot of pressure and was self-medicating with inappropriate drugs. Next day, as Hina prepared for the prefectural qualifiers happening in less than 24 hours, she was approached by someone who had visited all the way from a school in Tokyo to see her, and acknowledged being the very reason why he started track and field. Seeing that she had a new reason, the guy told her to cheer him on as he competed in the national tournament, and she promised that she would do her best to avoid losing. Later, she went into the bathroom to wash her face, and Osaka showed up behind her with her medication, asking whether she absolutely had to use something like that. She shared that she got it from her coach back in middle school, who encouraged its use because the drugs were undetectable and seemed to have evidently boosted her own performance. Osaka told her that even if her speed wasn't improving, she won the previous year's inter-school competition, and there was no reason for her to go that far. She shared that back in school, she was a victim of bullying and had no initial survival strategy. She only wanted to get good at something and poured her might into running since that was all she knew. For that, She was praised by everyone and became popular. But this, rather than encouraging her, made her scared that if she ever became slower, her life would fall apart and she would get bullied again. Also, she feared that after being caught cheating by Osaka, she would probably not be allowed to compete in the tournament anymore. However, he told her that she wasn't actually doping as she thought because someone looked into the contents of that fluid for her, and it turned out to be normal saline solution, which was harmless. Mito explained that giving someone plain water, pretending it was drugs, was a pretty standard and low-risk method to ensure that her speed was on par. This meant that the improvement in her time was just a placebo, and since she believed in doping, it brought out her full potential. Hearing this, Hina looked somewhat relieved that, in the end, her doping didn't matter, but now it meant she should have never overthought anything at all. Later, Osaka took her to the library, where they met Sayaka, who asked her to read some stuff. After she tested her a couple of times, Sayaka suspected that the girl might be dyslexic, as dyslexia was a learning ability that made reading difficult and could cause fatigue or drowsiness while reading long passages. She suggested that changing the font or text size could help, but Hina was somewhat surprised to hear that she wasn't terrible at studying because she was a stupid person. She became emotional and excused herself, but that was to run straight into Osaka's arms so she could cry her heart out. After a while, she said she would quit being an athlete, and Osaka said it was okay if she wanted to. She was pretty surprised that he wasn't trying to stop her or tell her how it would be a waste of her talent or how it wasn't good to quit halfway through. But he told her he had noticed that whenever she was running, she didn't seem to be enjoying herself, and he didn't believe that just because someone had talent meant they would have to keep doing something. She smiled, saying he was truly a psychic and he could read her mind just as she planned, as she kissed him on the cheek. Obviously, she might have fallen for him, and she confessed that. Dude was immediately excited, thinking he had finally achieved his target, but the moment he asked her out, she dumped him like all the girls before him, and he couldn't save his spine this time around. His dumb cluelessness made it clear that even psychics couldn't understand women. She told him he liked someone, and even though he thought it was Sayaka, she said that wasn't the person. In fact, she knew that he helped her because he was in trouble and not because he liked her. So she attributed this to one of the difficult lives and times of a psychic. However, Osaka confessed that the whole psychic thing was a farce, and the girl felt more betrayed. Later, Osaka met up with Mito, who had finally decided to visit the goddess after researching for a sufficient time. However, the staircase was ridiculously long, and she claimed her heart would explode, and she could only get up there if he gave her a piggyback. He told him to think of his payment as what he would receive when he had her melons pressing against him. The dude was crying because he didn't even know how to spell the word gym, yet here he was forced to carry that probably baby elephant all the way to the temple. They eventually made it and found the goddess, who enthusiastically welcomed Mito through her shrine. Mito instantly asked her to help her body get healed, but she said she could only grant her wish after granting Osaka's wish. This was because she had woven the threads of fate to fulfill Osaka's wish and couldn't grant 2 wishes at a time. If the girl hadn't tried at all to be clever, then the goddess claimed she would have just granted the wish instantly. Mito was disheartened and said they could leave immediately, and then she suggested that he could try ending the lives of the 6 girls one after the other. This would be better because if Osaka died at the same time as one of the girls, then he would know which one of them was his destined partner, and he could just end the girl's life to reset everything. Osaka told her that it wasn't a game, so she should stop talking like that, but Mito got pissed and expressed that it really wasn't a game to her, so he had to take it more seriously because if he was taking things seriously, the solution would have come to him immediately. In fact, she asked him why he never thought that his destined partner could be his childhood best friend, Tauka, whom he had been avoiding, and she had only kept quiet to avoid influencing his judgment. But the more she heard his story, the more unnatural it sounded to her. At any point in time, he had never seen Tauka alive at the time he died, yet he never asked her about taking her life. In fact, compared to someone like Mito or Hina, who had no connection to him, Tauka was more likely to end her life. This idiot told Mito to shut up because none of it was her business, but she said it wasn't the time for him to say trash. Suddenly, his head felt like it was about to explode, and he was about to die, and then he passed out before Mito could do anything. Surprisingly, he woke up in his room with a throbbing headache, thinking he had died. But when he found that his phone was still cracked and Tauka was at the doorway, he realized he hadn't died at all. She explained that he had a high fever, and he was rescued by Mito, who had called Tauka to take him home. He thought deeply about all Mito had said about Tauka being his destined partner, and how the headache and fever were probably because of the time loop. She offered to pick some things up for him and also offered to stay a bit longer with him. He told her she didn't have to do anything anymore because she wasn't the reason why his parents died. Just then, Hina came in to check on him, and Osaka immediately hid Tauka under the bed sheet covers. She was glad to find him alive, and although he was quite surprised to see her, Osaka also couldn't believe that he was hiding Tsuka and noticed he had acted instinctively. She said she had heard about his collapse from Mito and then handed him a card that a first-year student had sent to him. On it, he saw some weird association, and then she told him that it came from Yuji. Now, Yuji was his last possible destined partner, so he thought Mito was trying to help him meet her quickly. Just then, Hina started taking off her clothes, saying he had helped her out a lot and she was going to repay the favor in kind. But before he could say anything, she sat unclad in his presence and said she was going to massage him all the way to heaven and back. However, he told her that seeing her was enough to make him recover quickly, and she just smiled. All this while, Tauka lay under the sheets, feeling bad and staying all by herself. Osaka bid Hina goodbye, but Tauka remained sad, saying he seemed to be getting pretty popular and looked like he was well on his way to getting a girlfriend. However, he told her to cut it out and stop bringing up the same joke because it was getting on his nerves, especially after she rejected him after his confession. She said he was right, and that she would stop talking to him or bothering him, but he got angry and slammed his phone on the floor. Later, he consulted Mito about the complimentary card he had got from Yuji, so she explained that the association of the card was a new religious group with about 500 followers, and that Yuji was one of its leaders. The reason why they had very few followers was that one couldn't enter their headquarters or join without that referral card in Osaka's hand, which was why they needed to deal with Hina first, because she had the card. Mito said she would be accompanying him to see Yuji, but not because she cared about her or because she was the destined partner, but because she was never the type of girl who would ever take her life, and it was something Osaka would only understand when he saw her. Just then, Yuji showed up at their meeting point, but Mito soon started experiencing pains from her illness and was sent to the guest quarters. Osaka knew the girl was pretending, but didn't know what she was up to. But his next move was to find a way to talk to Yuji and find out if she was trying to end her life. He calmly asked her if they could talk and if there was anything at all she was struggling with, but she said it was the other way around and that she usually gave her referral card to those who were suffering or struggling. In fact, it was her job to listen to others, and the association was a place for reassuring others. She held his hand and told him he seemed rather tense, almost as though one wrong step he made could lead to his death. This was a burden no one else could understand, and so Yuji felt bad for Osaka. However, he told her it was nothing more than romantic problems, and that other people had more serious problems. Interrupting the conversation, a lady came in, reprimanding Yuji for letting someone in without a referral card. She was Yuji's mom, and Yuji responded to her politely, even though the mom had just treated her like a stray dog. Later, Yuji forced Osaka to take a bath, and while bathing, the guy realized that Yuji had some sort of atmosphere that made it easy for him to talk to her and made him more relaxed. He now understood why Mito was saying that Yuji wouldn't seem like the person who could take her own life, so he wondered who that would be. However, he heard a voice behind him and turned to see Yuji completely exposed, asking if she could join him. He didn't know whether it was her sudden appearance that startled him or those extra-large airbags on her, but she was offering to help him solve his romantic issues since he had helped to solve Hina's problem. She hugged him and asked him how it felt, but he couldn't explain that his feelings were somewhere down between his legs. She then lectured him on the importance of knowing what he truly desired, and whether his desire for a girlfriend was just to satisfy the raging hormones in him. In which case, she didn't mind doing it for him. As he saw everything dripping wet in that bathroom with just him and her, Osaka was left with a dripping mouth and eyes wide open. Much later, all Mito wanted to know was whether he did it or not, but the fool said he couldn't go through with it, so she called him a spineless, soy-sipping, cowardly loser. Because if he had done it, it would have been useful for her data analysis. She also told him that Yuji wasn't going to take her life because she was the core of their association, and everyone became devoted to her after talking to her, making them eager to serve the group. In fact, it seemed like she was a supernatural being because she was genuinely obsessed with helping people. Much later, Osaka reflected on how he had confessed his feelings to Tauka, but she told him to stay in the friend zone because she could never see him as her boyfriend. When Osaka was 5, his parents died in a car accident, and he was adopted by his grandmother. Tauka also lost her parents in the same accident, but was taken in by her relatives and lived nearby, so they often played together. However, in college, Tauka rejected him and he started avoiding her. So things ended up like that between them. Deep down, it seemed Tauka was all Osaka truly desired, and that was the answer to Yuji's question of why he wanted a girlfriend. However, he couldn't bring himself to say that even to himself. As he headed to the bathroom, he bumped into Yuji's weirdly behaved mum and wondered what she was up to, but to his utmost shock, he found Yuji lying unconscious on the floor, bleeding from her abdomen and holding her guts in her hands. He immediately called Tauka to talk to her about it, and she told him that the association was known to be pretty dangerous because lots of people had died there. He immediately called an ambulance, but instantly, he heard a very loud sound and fell on the floor. Right then, he was awakened from death, back at his lewd conversation with Mito, so he told her that the loop had restarted, Yuji died, and he got a call from Tauka, after which he died. But since Yuji died before he did, it meant she wasn't his destined partner. However, Tauka was still alive when he died, so Tauka wasn't his destined partner either, and this only meant that none of the girls was his destined partner. Mito also agreed that neither Tauka nor Yuji was his destined partner, but just before she told him what her idea was, he instantly said he still had to save Yuji, and they had to do something before she'd be murdered. He wanted them to first of all head to the room where he found her, but Mito had a plan of her own and said they should split for the time being. He held her hand, telling her it wasn't the time to be joking, but she said she was seriously pissed, and he didn't seem to be getting that. He ignored her and took his mind back to Yuji, wondering how to help her before she got murdered. When he got in there, she was still half-dressed, so he apologized for bumping into her, but he didn't know what to say to convince her. Although it sounded unbelievable, he told her that he had witnessed her being murdered in the future. But the girl took his words lightly until he eventually convinced her. She said she already knew her mother despised her, despite her helping the woman run the society ever since she was much younger. However, they never got along, and Yuji's mum suspected her of trying to take over the group, so maybe Yuji's death would be a relief for her. In that case, Yuji decided to head back home, but he told her not to do that. She said nothing had anything to do with him, but he said even if that was the case, he was there to save her. She was silent and then told him that if he wanted to save her, he should marry her. As shocking as this was, her reason for saying that was that if he couldn't marry her and protect her for the rest of his life, then there was no point because he couldn't save everyone every time. And in the process of saving one, he would let someone else die. However, he told her she was wrong because he had pondered upon what she told him in the bathroom when she asked him what he really wanted. Indeed, what he truly wanted was his friend, Tauka, whom he had loved for a while but had turned down. She even got a boyfriend, so he knew he couldn't stay hung up on forever and decided desperately to get a girlfriend. He then said he would have married Yuji if he were the same guy he was before their conversation. But now he realized he didn't really want a girlfriend because there was only one person he really loved, and she was the only one he wanted to date. It was all thanks to Yuji that he found that, and as such, she was his savior. So he returned the question to her, asking what she was truly looking for. She started sharing that when Hina showed up, because Yuji had contacted her prior to their conversation. Yuji confessed that she was only testing Osaka and had already planned to spend the night at Hinako's, but she wasn't lying about struggling with the same feelings. However, since he learned an important lesson, she told him to consider everything as resolved. Again, like every other girl who came before him, she kissed him on the cheek and thanked him for saving her but reassured him that she'll be fine on her own and that he should go and save the most important person in his life. As she left, though, she said she wouldn't have minded marrying him, but Osaka was already on his heels, running to meet his one true love. He said he had been avoiding her because things had been awkward since she rejected him, but even the last time he met her, it seemed she was always in a hurry. Even if she wasn't his destined girlfriend, he still wanted to save her with everything in him. On the other hand, he met Mito just on the way, saying she wanted to report something to him, and she had figured out his fated partner. Actually, it was that she had almost figured it out and only needed one more thing to confirm it, so she needed his help. Before he knew it, she made the usual bang sound with her mouth, but this time around, it wasn't a stun gun but an actual gun, and then a bullet drove right through his skull, leaving him dead. For the millionth time, Osaka died and restarted another loop. So he confronted Mito about her reason for ending his life, and she explained that her goal was to confirm that Tauka was his destined partner. He told her it wasn't possible because Tauka was still on the phone when he had died the previous time, but she then shared that Osaka's death had nothing to do with his destined partner. When they investigated the room where Yuji died, they found several lit charcoal stoves that were planted by Yuji's mother. It explained that Osaka entered a room filled with carbon monoxide and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. His destined girlfriend was still alive at that point, but Mito wasn't entirely sure if the loop would still activate under those conditions. So she tested it by ending his life, and it was successful, meaning his destined partner was Tauka. Osaka was filled with rage at the thought that this girl was still playing games after taking someone's life, but the stupid girl said she loved the games because she didn't have much to enjoy in her short life, and the game world was her dreamland. However, she said the one thing she absolutely despised was cheaters who broke the rules of life, because to her, the world was an unpleasant game where one only got one life. But there, Osaka was dying multiple times and living over and over again. For that reason, she wanted to end his life more times than ever and make sure he never woke up. What she hated even more was that he was using this advantage to help others. In any case, she told him she didn't envy him one bit because the goddess had no intention of granting his wish. He asked her what she meant by that, and then she gave him Tauka's diary, saying if he wanted to save his destined girlfriend, then he should read it. She then told him he was no longer needed and should get the heck out of her sight. He started reading Tauka's diary and found out that she had a seeming memory problem, which was why she decided to have her memories written down on paper. She started by narrating the first time she met Osaka in school. She had been treated badly by some ugly bullies and stayed on her own because everyone said she was the mop-haired girl with stinky pits. Her lazy, wasted mom didn't do much laundry, so her clothes almost always smelled bad, and they didn't have money for haircuts, so she always looked unkempt. Her first encounter with Osaka was watching him play basketball with his friends, and one day during lunch, Tauka joined her, and they discovered what they had in common. Following this, they occasionally had lunch together and became friends. She asked him why he was having lunch in a place like that despite having so many friends, so he shared that life was going on way too perfectly for him as he was surrounded by people who always expected him to do well. So he was kind of exhausted by that kind of life, and talking to Tauka seemed easy for him. In her head, Tauka relished the fact that someone like Osaka liked her and also had struggled like her. Later, she returned home to find her mom with strange men, whom she used to pay for living expenses, and on those days she was told not to return to her room. On that day, on a certain day, some girls, her bullies, attacked her, saying that she should no longer talk to Osaka because their queen bee was going to confess her feelings to him. They also added that Osaka was only talking to Tauka because he felt sorry for her. As if the day wasn't terrible enough, Tauka returned home but met one of her mom's creepy boyfriends, who suddenly grabbed her and wanted to take advantage of her. But she managed to escape, even though she had nowhere she could go. She later found herself at a shrine, the very same matchmaking shrine that Yasuga, the goddess, was in. She considered asking the goddess for a boyfriend and hoping that it would be Osaka, but Tsuka soon remembered the mean girl's words and realized that Osaka would never date a girl as gross and pathetic as herself. She convinced herself that she was not worthy enough to be his girlfriend, although she wished to talk to Osaka and wished he wouldn't have a girlfriend so they'd keep talking. Surprisingly, the goddess granted her wish, without Tauka being aware of how serious things were about to get for her. Here's a brief backstory of hers. One day, when Tauka was younger and her parents were fighting in the car, they briefly stopped to get her a snack in the vehicle, but that same year they got divorced, so she felt she shouldn't have said anything back then. If she could go back to that time, she would stay quiet for sure, and maybe her life would be different. As a result of her wish, Tauka found herself back 10 years in the past. Her parents had died in a car accident, and she was taken in by her aunt and uncle, who had no children of their own. He didn't fully understand her situation at first, but then she saw Osaka, who had lost his parents in the same accident. This meant that by changing her actions, she had caused the deaths of Osaka's parents and realized that it was all her wish at the shrine that caused everything. From that age, she pretended to meet Osaka by coincidence and kept an eye on him at all times. She didn't know exactly how that wish would manifest, but if Osaka died, he wouldn't be able to get a girlfriend either, so she couldn't take her eyes off him even for a second. To prevent anyone from suspecting anything, she acted as cheerfully and carefree as possible and had tried getting Osaka a girlfriend so that if that happened, her wish would be nullified. She had thought that if he went out with the cutest girl in their class, he wouldn't refuse and would eventually confess, but to her utmost shock, he confessed that he liked her. Instantly, she felt like dying, so she turned him down without a second thought. If Osaka was ever surprised before, then this was the queen of all surprises in his life. And he couldn't believe the idiotic goddess knew he would never get a girlfriend but still led him on in the worst way ever. He had to find Tauka immediately, even as he read all her desperate plans to ensure that he had a girlfriend. In the end, she lied about having a boyfriend, but her plan backfired, and she planned to end her life. When she finally noticed that he had developed an interest in Mia, she was at peace because if Osaka eventually got a girlfriend, then she could die in peace. All this while, Osaka was trying to reach her and had called her multiple times, even arriving at the gate of her house but didn't find her there. She eventually picked up his call and said she knew he had already read the diary, and then she apologized, saying everything was her fault. At this point, she was already at a bridge and ready to jump, so she eventually did, and Osaka died again. When he got back to the start, he resumed at the point of their phone call where Tauka was blaming herself for everything. So in a desperate attempt to save her from dying, he told her he was right below her at the moment. She said he was lying, but he told her he could see that she was trying to jump, so she should just wait, and he'd be there in no time. Since he had bought himself some time, he tried looking for her first by heading to the shrine, but was determined that even if that wasn't where she was, he would die as many times as it took to rescue her. On the way, he saw that the goddess had been murdered, and she confessed that all the while she had suspected that Yasuga wasn't any god and was just a human being. This was because Yasuga referred human sacrifices over to the shrine, which was a pretty old-fashioned practice. He went on to explain the pretty complex process, which in summary said that Yasuga was responsible for taking people's lives to maintain balance in the world. But Osaka told her to spare him the physics lecture because now that Yasuga was dead, it meant that he and Tauka would also die. However, Mito told him that he was no longer bound by the connections made by the so-called goddess. Since his destined girlfriend has died, there wouldn't be any convenient do-overs. In other words, Mito had stopped the loop, and it meant this time around, death would be final. He just walked out in silence and left her there by herself. She overdosed on her medication and died with the worthless goddess. Meanwhile, Osaka thought about the possible places where Tauka would be and eventually located her. At the same time, the girl had already taken a knife and started cutting her flesh, her jugulars, but luckily he caught her. He told her he had no plans on getting any girlfriend other than her, and so she should stop it. But she confessed that she didn't mean it when she wrote in her journal that if he got a girlfriend, she would die. In fact, the truth was she was just scared of dying. She thought about a million ways to die but was scared to go through with any. While she kept yapping, Osaka told her he didn't want her to die, but she got angry that he wasn't blaming her for ruining his life and lying to him the whole time. The boy said he was angry because Tauka never ever listened to what he said, not when he asked her out and not when he, just a few seconds ago, emphasized that he didn't want to die. He called her to stare right through his soul and see that he meant his words, but the girl had already broken down crying and apologizing. She dropped the knife and they stayed until dawn, during which Osaka confessed that he had always known she was hiding something for the longest time. So when she rejected him, he felt he had gotten it and discovered that she probably never liked him. The girl said that was never what she intended, but Osaka said he was going to share the truth with her. There and then, he confessed that even though they were just normal people, her expression of him might have changed, and he wanted to know if she actually didn't like him. But Tauka said she had always liked him and liked him more now than ever before. But just as the poor guy was about to ask her out, she said she couldn't date him. 2 months later, nothing much changed, except that something weird happened at the shrine and Mito was now the Yasuga goddess, while the previous one had shrunk to a smaller version who became Osaka's adopted sister. Meanwhile, Osaka's previous girlfriends were all hating on the fact that Tauka was more likely than they were to get to him as a girlfriend, but they somehow had hopes that they would break up soon. However, Sayaka told Mia to be more realistic because there was a high chance of them breaking up. As for Yuji, she mended her relationship with her mother, and the old lady stepped down from her position. Both Yuji and Hina decided they were not interested in men and their eggplants, so that left Osaka and Tauka to make a decision about their love life. While they both sat in awkward silence on the beach, Sayaka and Mia were pained as usual and attacked them, forcing them to hurry and make a decision if they were being serious about their lives. Osaka asked Tauka why she wasn't willing to date him, and she said she felt that it was a crime given that she had been reliving life since she was way younger, and was mentally already a 28-year-old who would be by far advanced for someone his age. However, he told her he had already reset his life about 100 times, so his mental age was about 90, and that made him her ditty. With that, he asked her to be his girlfriend, and that began a brand new chapter in their lives with their haters watching from afar. That very day, Osaka finally had a girlfriend for the first time in his life. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for similar content. As always, thanks for watching.